seeing that this Shabbat we read Parashat Zachor, and a couple of days later we have Purim, I wish to begin with a few things related to these matters. I will share the screen with you. Right now we're looking at Hilchot Tefillah Perek Yud Gimel. So, Hilchot Tefillah Birkat Kohanim, Perek Yud Gimel, Halacha Kaf. Rosh Chodesh Adar, שיכול להיות בשבת, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, קוראים בפרשת שקלים, ומפטירים ביהוידע הכהן. וכן אם חל ראש חודש אדר להיות בתוך השבת, if it falls just before ראש חודש, אפילו בערב שבת, even if it falls on a Friday, מקדימים וקוראים בשבת שלפניו בפרשת שקלים. We read the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh. Parashat Shekalim, of course, speaks of the mitzvah of Mahasit HaShekel, that every Jew is required to give to the Mikdash in order to have a part, to be an associate, as it were, of Klal Yisrael, that is, brings the daily sacrifices, the Korbanot HaSibur Shebechol Yom, or every day on Shabbatot, Musafim, Yomim Tovim, etc. This all comes from the Shekalim, from the Mahasit HaShekel. And it should be pointed out that the mitzvah, the chovah, to give, that every Jew must give Mahasit HaShekel, a certain amount of money to the Mikdash on a yearly basis. This chovah does not exist when there is no Mikdash. Rambam writes this explicitly. Let me quote it to you. It's a Mishnah Meforashet. It's in the Mishnah Masechet Shekalim. I will open up Hilchot Shekalim for a moment. At the beginning of Hilchot Shekalim, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Rambam writes, Misvat Asamin HaTorah, Liten Kol Ish MiYisrael Mahasit HaShekel, B'chol Shana V'Shana. Every year, every person, every Jew is required to give this amount of money to the Mikdash. And Rambam continues, in Halacha Hef, here in Perek Aleph, Hashekalim enam noaglim ela bifnei habayit. This mitzvah, which is a mitzvah min Torah, does not exist when there is no Mikdash, but for the obvious reason, and there are no korbanot, and there's nothing in which to participate. Or bizman shamikdash kayam, says Rambam, when there is a Mikdash, nochanim et hashekalim ben ba'aretz, ben b'chutz la'aretz, all Jews, wherever they may live, including outside Eretz Yisrael, must give them a hasit hashekel. And when the Mikdash is harev, this mitzvah does not, even in Eretz Yisrael, there is no such mitzvah. This is with regards to the first mitzvah, that the first parasha that Rambam mentioned in Ilchot Tefillah. And now we continue. So, Perek Yod Gimel in Ilchot Tefillah, Ubikat Kohanim, Halacha Kaf. Shabbat Sheniya, the second Shabbat, in this, there is this, what Rambam is describing here is the fact that there are these particular Arba Parshiot that we read. The second Shabbat, Korim b'Parashat Zachor, Umaftirim, Kol Amar Hashem Sebaoth Pakadti, etc., to do with Amalek. U'ezohi Shabbat Sheniya, what do we mean by the second Shabbat? Kol Shehar Purim Liyoth B'tocha, the week in which Purim falls, Wafilu Ba'alev Shabbat, even if this is on Friday. And then the third is Para Aduma, which has to do with the necessary preparations that every Jew must undergo, if assuming they are Tume'emeth, that they came into some kind of contact with the dead, they are required to prepare themselves for the Korban Pesach. Ezohi Shabbat Shalishit Hasemucha L'Revi'it. The third is always the one following. The third is the one following. Is the one before the fourth. And what is the fourth? B'Revi'it Korim LaChodesh Hazeh. The fourth of these Shabbatot, we read the parasha of Chodesh Hazeh, which talks about Korban Pesach itself. As we pointed out, with regards to Mahasit HaShekel, just as there is no mitzvah to give Mahasit HaShekel when there is no Mikdash, it is not possible to perform Korban Pesach, and therefore it's not necessary to become Tahor, to remove Tumat Met from oneself. It is not possible to do this when there is no Mikdash. The Korban Pesach can only be brought in the Mikdash. And yet we see that all these Parshiot we read every year on these particular Shabbatot, despite the fact that L'Ma'aseh, we are not able to perform any of them. Also, it would seem. Truth, however, is not so. As we're about to explain, one of these four mitzvot, one of these four concepts, which has to do with the first of the second of these parashiot, which is Parashat Zachor, which we're about to read this Shabbat, is something that can be mekuyam, that can be performed, that needs to be performed. even at the present time, as we're about to discuss. And the other three, which cannot be and need not be performed, we nevertheless read, from which fact we understand that the reading of these Parshiot is not simply to instruct us and to remind us to do something in the here and now that we are capable and required to do, but rather also by way of hinuch. It's a type of education. It is also reminding us that we are required to do these things. These things must take place. We cannot simply say to ourselves, well, what can we do? There's no mikdash, so no point reading about shekalim right now, and there's no point reading about para aduma or Parashat HaChodesh. We're not going to do a Korban Pesach this year, so what's the point of reading about Parashat HaChodesh? This also proves, by the way, parenthetically, I add, that the claim made by some that people who, for whatever reason, do not like the idea of korbanot, or sacrifices, that in the future there will be no sacrifices. If this is the case, then I would be pleased to hear their explanation why it is that we read Parashat HaChodesh, why we read about Parashat Shekalim, Para Aduma, etc. And the truth is, I think, if the truth be told, many of these people, there are many Jews, including some of them religious Jews, but confused Jews, who assume that that's the case. There will not be korbanot, and the only there's never going to be a Mahasita shekel in the future or something like that. There certainly won't be a Korban Pesach, and therefore reading Parashat HaChodesh, which describes the performing the Korban Pesach, this is all some kind of archaeological artifact. It's just one of those things that these strange people, this is what a non-Jew might think, those strange Jews, they do these things, they go on about these things which have no more relevance. They themselves know they're not relevant and never will be in the future. And there are many Jews who think the same. Or they hope that that's the case, because it doesn't, certain things just don't fit with their worldview, with their understanding of the world, of life, of reality, of the Torah. So if you ask them, well, why do we read about Para Aduma? They will tell you, well, it's one of those things. The Chachamim made this takana. We don't change takanot nowadays. We don't do anything. We can't do anything about that, so we'll just read it. But truth be told, the least said, the better. So let's just read it and let's get on with it. But this, of course, is the view of outsiders of Torah, as Hagon, Rabbi Haim, his name escapes me now. Will come back to me. As he used the term outsiders of Torah and insiders of Torah. That is the view of an outsider of Torah. You can be an outsider of Torah and keep Shabbat and eat only kasher. You can also, of course, be an outsider of Torah if you know nothing about Torah and do not practice anything to do with the Torah. You can be, of course, even more of an outsider, perhaps, even if you're not Jewish. But there are plenty of people who are outsiders of Torah, who ostensibly are what we would call frum Jews, religious Orthodox Jews. So this is an entirely incorrect and spurious understanding of the Torah. The truth, of course, is that we read these Parshiot because they are all very real and very necessary, and we must not forget about these concepts, and we must be constantly reminded that something very major is missing in our lives. as Jews, as individuals, as a people, as a nation. And that is why we read these Parashiot. If that were not the case, then really there would be no purpose in reading these Parashiot at all. Unless, of course, you subscribe to the archaeological theory of Judaism, which I imagine it goes without saying that we do not. In this perek, in Ilchot Tefillah, Birkat Kohanim, there is something else relevant to our discussion here, which appears in Halacha Yod Het here, in this version, this edition, and in Halacha Yod Zayin, in other editions, at the end of Halacha Yod Zayin, Rambam writes, Befurim Korim B'Shaharith V'Yavo Amalek. As we know, in the morning of Purim in the Beit HaKnesset, we read the Parashat V'Yavo Amalek at the end of Parashat B'Shalach, according to the Bavli division of the Parashiot. That's Shemot Perek Yod Zayin. And here too, you could ask the question: Why do we read this? Is it just again some archaeology, just an historical artifact? We remind ourselves about something that once took place, or was there something else to it? I once asked a young yeshiva bocher, why do you fast on Tisha B'Av? And he didn't understand the question, so I explained. I said, why do you fast on Tisha B'Av? Is it because there was a Mikdash, there was a Hurban, Yerushalayim, the Mikdash, parts of Eretz Yisrael were destroyed at that time. Many Jews were killed at that time. So this is an act of national, institutionalized mourning, Evel, what's called Avelut Yeshana, ancient mourning on an ancient event. And that's it. So we just know what happened. So we won't forget what happened, and that's why we fast. And he said, yeah, that's what I understand. Well, and I said to him, well, that's not correct. That's all of that is true, but there's much more to it. The reason we fast on Tisha B'Av is also in order to think about and prepare for the future. If we look in Sefer Zemanim, in Ilchot Ta'aniyot, Perek Hey, and I will share the screen with you. You should be able to see it now. Ilchot Ta'aniyot Perek Hey. Rambam speaks about the various fast days, not referring to Yom Kippurim, of course. Talking about the other fast days. And Rambam says at the beginning of this perek, Yesham Yamim, that is an Arabic idiom, Yesham, like in English we say there are such and such, which means Yeshma Masiyuth, there exist in reality. Yesh, so Rambam was thinking in Arabic here when he wrote this, and writing in Hebrew, Yesh Sham Yamim. Shekol Yisrael mit'anim bahem. There are days where all of Am Yisrael fasts, because of the various calamities that took place on those days. Why? Not just to remember, but in order to awaken us, in order to cause us to think and to act in the future, not just to remember the past. And to direct us towards, encourage us, and move us to do teshuvah. And thus we will recall our actions, our negative actions in the past, and the actions of our forefathers in earlier generations, which were similar to our actions today. It is incorrect to think that all generations were perfect or close to perfect and on a very, very high level. And it's only now in recent times that we have hit rock bottom. It is true, perhaps, that in many ways we have hit rock bottom, but in many other ways, things have not changed that much. And that's what Rambam says explicitly here. This romantic notion that once upon a time, all Jews were tzaddikim, melumadim, and everything was fine and dandy, that's just a childish understanding of Jewish history and reality. So their behavior wasn't all that different from ours, which resulted in all those calamities, says Rambam. And by recalling these things, we will be moved and caused to change, to do better, to do the right thing. So you see, the purpose of fasting, I said to this young man, is Nashuv lehitiv. Now, what does that mean on Tisha B'Av? How can you be meitiv? What can you do about what was? You cannot do anything about what was. You can do something about what is or what will be. So, the essential reason to fast on Tisha B'Av is to know that there's no mikdash, and that's why the halacha is, of course, when there is a mikdash, there's no Tisha B'Av. The reason for Tisha B'Av is that we recognize and are constantly reminded in the most obvious and visceral way that there's no mikdash, there's something very major missing here, and that we should be doing something about it. It's our responsibility to do something about it. This is what I said to that young man at that time, and this has everything to do with what we're discussing here as well. If we read on Purim, as Rambam just told us in Hilchot, Tefillah Birkat Kohanim Perek Yud Gimel, Halacha Yod Het over here. Korim v'Shacharit v'Yavo Amalek. You have to ask yourself, why are we reading about Amalek? What are we going to do about this? Or is it just some vague historical artifact? So these are some of the basic questions that we should keep in mind. Some of the notions and concepts we must keep in mind. Now, if we look in Rambam at the end of Mishneh Torah, Hilchot Melachim Milchamoth Perek Aleph, Rambam begins. You should be able to see this, correct? Shalosh Mitzvot Israel Shalosh Mitzvot Nistavu Israel B'Sha'at Knisatam La'aretz. 3 mitzvot. Am Yisrael was commanded to perform 3 different specific mitzvot upon entering Eretz Yisrael. Lemanot lahem melech. One is to establish a proper Torah-based form of government. Lemanot lahem melech. Shene Emar. How do we know it's a Torah-based system of government? That we can discuss on another occasion, although it should be obvious. Just as in the United States, you have a constitution, and therefore it's obvious to everybody that, well, not everybody, that would be an exaggeration, but to those who care about the Constitution, that the American government, the federal government, is to be modeled on and based on the provisions of that Constitution, that being the foundational document of the United States as a country, as a political entity. And thus it has to be in accordance with that Constitution. The same is true of Am Yisrael and the Torah. Our Constitution is a Torah. I'm not saying we don't need a Constitution in Israel today. We do. But even though we do not have one, essentially we do have one. We have a Torah from which can be learned and extrapolated everything that we need to know and understand in order to establish a true Mamlechet Kohanim Kadosh, a true Jewish state. And it's obvious, therefore, that it has to be in accordance with the Torah. Otherwise, it's against the Constitution. But we can speak about that topic on another occasion at greater length. So there are three things mentioned here. One is to choose a king and to establish a system of government, because the king is the head of the government. He himself alone is not the government. He is the head of the pyramid. The second is to destroy the descendants of Amalek. As we shall discuss. And the third is And the third is to build the Mikdash in Yerushalayim. Rambam continues. Minui melech kodem lemilchemet Amalek. Now these three mitzvot are to be performed in a particular order, says Rambam. First of all, you need to have a government. In other words, the Jewish people need leadership that understands what the Jewish people are all about and is actually interested and motivated in creating that Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, that unique Jewish nation, a holy nation, and also knows what that means, is familiar with what the Torah dictates and instructs us to do. So this mitzvah and you need to have leadership to actually follow through on all these mitzvot and many other things. Without a leadership, without such Jewish governance in place, nothing else will happen. So minui melech kodem leminchemet Amalek. That is to be done first, before the mitzvah of mehiyat Amalek. V'hachratat zera Amalek kodemet lebinyan habayit. And the Mikdash is to be built after Achratat Zera Amalek. And this is learned by the Chachamim, as Rambam quotes here from the Pesukim. And then Rambam continues.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.